Well, one of the people who is changing the game on how the way we think informs the way we act is the author and researcher Brene Brown. If you haven't seen her Netflix special entitled The Call to Courage, run and don't walk to see it. In her book entitled Rising Strong, she shares this wonderful truth bomb. My husband Steve and I were having one of those days, she says. That morning, we'd overslept. Son Charlie couldn't find his backpack. Daughter Ellen dragged herself out of bed because she'd been studying late. At work, I had 5 back-to-back meetings. Steve, who's a pediatrician, was dealing with cold and flu season. By dinner time, we were almost in tears. Steve opened up the refrigerator and sighed. We have no groceries, not even lunch meat. I shot back, I'm doing the best I can. You can shop too, you know. I know, he said in a measured voice. I do it every week. What's going on? I knew exactly what was going on, Brene said. I had turned his comment into a story about how I'm a disorganized, unreliable wife and mom. I apologize. I started my next sentence with the phrase that's become a lifesaver in my marriage, in my parenting, and in my professional life. It's worth the price of admission today. That phrase is the story I'm telling myself. The story I'm telling myself is that you were blaming me for not having groceries, that I was screwing up. And Steve said, nope, not at all. I was going to shop yesterday. I ran out of time. I'm not blaming you. I'm just hungry. Storytelling, Brene says, helps us impose order on chaos. When we're in pain, we create a narrative to make sense of it. This story doesn't have to be based on any kind of real or factual information. One dismissive glance from a coworker can instantly turn into, I knew that witch did not like me. I responded to Steve defensively because when I'm in doubt, the I'm not enough explanation is often the first thing I grab. It's like my comfy jeans. They may not be flattering, but they are familiar. Our stories are also about self-protection. I told myself Steve was blaming me so that I could be mad at him instead of admitting that I was vulnerable or afraid or feeling inadequate. That's what human beings do. When we're under threat or we're hurt, we run. We find someone to blame. We blame ourselves before anyone else can. We pretend we don't care. But this unconscious storytelling leaves us stuck. We keep tripping over the same issues, and after we fall, we find it hard to get back up again. In my research on shame and vulnerability, I've learned a lot about resilience, she said. I spent time with some amazing people, Fortune 500 CEOs, to long-married couples who are skilled at recovering from setbacks. And they all have one common characteristic. They can recognize their own confabulations and they can challenge them. The good news is that we can rewrite our stories. We just have to be brave enough to reckon with our deepest emotions and then rethink them. In navigation, she said, dead reckoning is how you calculate your location. It involves knowing where you've been, how you got there, speed, route, wind conditions. It's the same with life. We can't chart a new course until we find out where we are, how we got to that point, and where we want to go. Reckon comes from the Old English word Racinian, meaning to narrate. When you reckon with emotion, you can change your narrative. You have to acknowledge your feelings and get curious about the story behind them. Then you can challenge those confabulations and get to the truth. So the next time you're in a situation that's pushing your buttons, a breakup, a setback, a conflict at work, and you're overwhelmed by anger or disappointment or embarrassment, try this, she says. engage your feelings. Your body is going to offer you the first clue that you're having an emotional reaction. Your boss assigns the project you wanted to a colleague, and your face suddenly flushes. It starts to get hot. Or your response may involve racing thoughts or replaying the event in slow motion. You don't need to know exactly where the feelings are coming from. You just have to acknowledge them. My stomach is in knots. I want to punch a wall. I need Oreos and lots of them. Get curious about the story behind the feelings. Now you have to ask yourself a few questions. You don't have to answer them right off the bat. Why am I being so hard on everyone? What happened right before this Oreo craving set in? I'm obsessing over what my sister said. Why am I doing that? Now, this step is surprisingly difficult. You're furious because Todd got the project, but it's easier to steamroll your anger with contempt. Todd is just a brown-noser. This company is a joke. Getting curious about your feelings might lead you to some discoveries. What if you're more hurt than you realize? What if your attitude played a part? Pushing through discomfort is how we get to the truth. Write it down. The most effective way to become aware of our stories is to write them down. Nothing fancy. You can just finish these sentences. This is the story I'm telling myself about my emotions, about my thinking, about my body, about my actions. You might want to write, I'm so ticked off, I feel like I'm having a heat stroke. She thinks I'm incapable. I want to hurl a stapler at her head. You can be mad, you can be self-righteous, you can be confused. A story driven by emotion and self-protection probably doesn't involve accuracy and logic and civility. If your story contains those things, it's likely that you're not being fully honest. Last but not least, then get ready to rumble. It's time to poke and prod at your findings, exploring the ins and outs. The first questions might be the simplest. What are the facts and what are my assumptions? I don't really know why my boss picked Todd. I didn't tell her I was interested in the project. I figured she just knew. Number two, what do I need to know about the others involved? Maybe Todd has some special skill I don't know about, or she has me in mind for something else. Now we get to the more difficult question. What am I really feeling? What part did I play? And I don't want to ask for anything because someone might tell me no. You may learn that you've been masking shame with cynicism. You might find that you prefer stewing in resentment rather than being vulnerable. Those truths might be uncomfortable, but they are the basis for meaningful change. Figuring out your story can take 20 minutes. It can take 20 years. You may not make one big transformation. Maybe it's a series of incremental changes. And if you're thinking this sounds too hard, I get it. The reckoning can feel dangerous because you're confronting yourself, the fear, aggression, shame, and blame. Facing our stories takes courage, but owning our stories is the only way to get a new ending, by changing the way we think. Now, as a general rule, you know this, our emotions and our behaviors flow out of our thoughts. Discouraged people tend to think discouraging thoughts. Worried people tend to think anxious thoughts. These thoughts become so automatic, we don't even notice that we're thinking them. Now, to see what I'm talking about, take a moment this afternoon or tonight before you go to bed to read 1 Kings chapter 19. The prophet Elijah has reached this high point in his life in 1 Kings 19 when he defeated the prophets of Baal. He was flying high until one event, the opposition of Jezebel, plunged him into fear and to doubt. Pay attention to his thoughts in chapter 19. He felt worthless. He felt hopeless. He felt isolated. He felt unable to cope. But God gave Elijah something else to think about. He gave Elijah an epiphany. The Lord is about to pass by here. He reminded Elijah that Elijah did not walk alone, and then he gave Elijah a mission. Elijah thought that his problem was Jezebel. The simple fact of the matter is there will always be a Jezebel in our lives. The real challenge for healthy spiritual living lies between our ears. The way we live will inevitably be a reflection of the way we think. So we have to monitor what we're thinking about. The good news is if God can change Elijah's thinking, God can change ours. The New Living Translation of the Bible interprets Romans 12:2 like this: let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Now, when I think about thinking, my thoughts go back 18 years ago to 2004, on a trip I took to Chicago. There's a congregational church about 10 blocks from the Loop in downtown where you can see an amazing painting. Without being labeled as such, it is a picture of Jesus. He's seated on a rock, alone, looking straight ahead, overlooking a valley. But the disconcerting thing is that while his face looks entirely normal, his skull does not. Part of it has been peeled back, allowing you to see the underlying brain tissue with whole strands of it just interlocking and overlapping. Almost looks like it's moving. But as you watch it, and as your eyes get accustomed to the light, you realize that what you're looking at isn't brain tissue at all, but fingers. Dozens of fingers, all of them grabbing and pulling at the mind of Jesus, which brings new meaning to the phrase, it feels like someone is messing with my head. It's the battle, you see, for what fills your mind. If you don't make up your mind, someone will make up your mind for you. Now, one of the best professors to guide us through making up our mind is the Apostle Paul. He has some of the best mind lines in all of Scripture. Romans 12, you're transformed in Christ through the renewing of your mind. Philippians 4, whatever is noble, good, and trustworthy, think on these things. Paul wrote a lot of his stuff in prison. His body was behind bars, but his mind was still free. He had taken his thoughts captive long before he entered a jail cell. He knew the two truths we need to know. The battle for life is won or lost in your mind. Your thoughts will control you, so you have to control your thoughts. Paul was not always a thought warrior. Here's how he describes himself in Romans 7. I don't understand what I do. For what I want to do, I do not do, but what I hate, I do. In my inner being, I delight in God's law, but I see another law at work in me, waging war against the law of my mind, making me a prisoner of the sin at work within me. What a wretched man that I am. That does not sound like a guy who has mastered his thoughts. But then he says this in Philippians, I've learned the secret of being content in any situation. That does sound like a guy who has mastered his thoughts. Paul's change should encourage you. Your thought life can be crazy. Your mind can be out of control. You despair, you obsess, you get confused, you feel overwhelmed. But Paul mastered his mind. He said he learned a secret, which means that we can too. How did he win the battle for his mind? He wrote this, though we live in this world, we do not wage war as this world does. The weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. We demolish arguments and pretense that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. If we're going to demolish strongholds, we have to recognize the power that lies have over us. I want you to think about it like this. I know a shaggy sheepdog named Max who will not leave his yard. A car drives by. Max loves to chase cars. The thought of grabbing one and wrestling the beast into submission makes him drool. Max wants to give chase so badly, but he just sits in the yard. Then two boys start playing catch in the street. The ball rolls up to the edge of Max's yard. He desperately wants to get the ball and run away from the boys, but he doesn't. One of the boys starts to tease him. "What's the matter, Max? You afraid of the ball?" Max wants to bite the little brat, but his tormentor is just outside the yard. A cat walks down the street. Max cannot imagine the nerve of this cat. He knows that cats are evil and they are on this earth only to do Satan's work. Max wants to run, but he can't. Why? An invisible electric fence lines his yard. When an unsuspecting dog crosses the line, zap, he gets a small jolt of electricity. But here, in the words of Paul Harvey, is the rest of the story. Max's owners used to have an electric fence. They bought one, they set it up, they turned it on. Max got shocked several times, but the fence also zapped a neighbor kid who came into their yard to grab a stray frisbee. The kid's parents complained, threatened a lawsuit, and Max's owners returned the electric fence to the store. Years have passed since they owned the fence. Max still won't leave the yard. He thinks he can't. In his mind, he's a prisoner, missing out on life. He associates life outside his yard with pain, that magical place where cars can be caught, where balls can be stolen, and the evil mission of cats can be thwarted, is just out of reach. He has no idea that the only thing keeping him constrained is a lie that he believes. Now you laugh, but is it possible you may be more like Max than you think? You have gone through enough hurtful circumstances in the key places of your life in which you got just enough jolt, a bit of a shock, a sting of pain to your heart that you've decided trying even one more time is just not worth the risk. What makes it worse is the number of places you've stopped trying is growing larger. The greatest weapon in the evil one's arsenal is the lie. Maybe his only weapon is the lie, which is why the first tool to learn for renewing your mind is the replacement principle. Remove the lies, replace them with truth. Once you grasp it, you can begin to use this to change your mind and change your life. Here's the lie. If I just had more, fill in the blank, money, property, then I'd be happy. Here's the truth. I know what it is to be in need. I know what it is to have plenty. I've learned the secret of being content in every circumstance, whether I'm well-fed or I'm hungry. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. You have to take the thought, the lie, captive. You have to remove it and then replace it with the truth. The verb tense of take captive in the Bible implies repeated and continuous action. This is not something you do one time. This is something you do thousands of times in your life, maybe dozens of times a day. Let's say you hate an ugly tree in your yard. You want it gone. You decide the time has come to take care of the problem. You march into your yard with a small handsaw. You pick an ugly branch and you cut it off the tree. You walk back into the house, all the while whistling Another One Bites the Dust by Queen. The next day, you are shocked to see the tree is still standing strong. I know the analogy is absurd. You would never try to kill a tree by just removing a branch. The branch isn't the problem. The tree's the problem. And actually, the root system of the tree is the main culprit. If you don't remove the root system when you cut down a tree, it's going to grow back. Our problem is that we attack the symptoms and not the source. The behavior is not our root problem. 2,000 years ago, Paul said this: those who are dominated by sinful nature think about sinful things, but those who are controlled by the Spirit think about things that please the Spirit. Letting your sinful nature control your mind, it leads to death. But letting the Spirit control your mind leads to life and peace. Paul taught that if you allow a thought into your mind, it will come out in your life. If you want to change the way you live, you got to change the way you think. And now for just a few seconds of grossing you out, but I promise you it's for your own good. In Joshua 1, in Psalm 1, and 6 other passages in the Psalms, God tells us to ruminate. The word meditate in these verses is the same as the word ruminate. Now, what does ruminate mean? Rumination is what cows do with their cud. Cows get a mouthful of grass, they chew it up, they swallow it, they throw it back up in their mouth, they chew it some more, they swallow it again, they throw it back up into their mouth over and over. That is what it means to ruminate. That is the exact idea behind the word meditate. Meditating is taking a thought and chewing on it, swallowing it, bringing it back to mind, chewing on it some more. We do that over and over and over. Why? Well, why do cows ruminate on their cud? Because it allows them to get the maximum amount of nutrition out of the grass. Why do we meditate on God's truth, God's love, God's great deeds? It allows us to get the maximum amount of spiritual nutrition out of our godly thoughts. So here's your homework assignment for this week. I want you to spend some time ruminating, meditating on the words of the 23rd Psalm. Psalm 23 is read quite often at funerals, which is how most people, honestly, get acquainted with it. That's ironic because even though it's a comforting passage about death, it really is about an alternative way of life that is available to us here and now. So let's go through a few lines in Psalm 23 one at a time, because in every one of them there's a decision that needs to be made. What kind of life do you really want to live? The Lord is my shepherd, David says, which means you have a choice right out of the gate. I can live like I have a shepherd I can trust, or I can live as if I have no shepherd at all. I can choose the latter, but that means that every moment of every day I have to go through life with the weight of my own life on my own shoulders. Life without a shepherd is a life on the edge of your seat of unceasing worry. You worry about the future. You worry about your kids. If you don't have kids, you worry about that. You worry about your job. If you don't have a job, then you worry about that. You worry about your marriage. If you're not married, then you worry about that. You worry about your health or about the health of the people you love. You worry about your money. Or if you don't have enough money, you worry about that. How many of you have found worry to be efficient and constructive and life-giving? There is another way to do life, and that is to live in the constant care and the presence and the protection of a good shepherd. So let's break down the opening of Psalm 23 one word at a time. The Lord. What does that mean? It means that there's a creator, somebody bigger, more powerful, wiser than you, who is ready, willing, and able to create new opportunities out of your old challenges, someone on whose grace and power and wisdom you can lean. The Lord is. In other words, he's not simply an idea a philosophy, an abstract. The Lord is. He's more real than these four walls. The Lord is my. Now here is where it gets personal. The God who has created and is still creating wants to be in a relationship with me, to walk with me beside still waters and through life-threatening valleys. The Lord is my shepherd. What does that mean? A shepherd knows his sheep. He leads his sheep. He cares for his sheep, which means the question is, do you trust the promise that God actually wants to do that for you? When the Lord is my shepherd becomes the thought that is habitually cycling in my mind, my outlook on the world, my outlook on my own life changes. So here's God's invitation. Instead of ruminating during the course of this week on a problem, on a troubled relationship, on not having enough money, or your health, or some future outcome you don't know about and can't control anyway, ruminate on this one line every morning when you wake up. The Lord is my shepherd. The Lord is my shepherd. Trusting your shepherd means, however, that you have to consciously relinquish control. Control of other people, control of our own lives. That part doesn't come easy at all. And yet, it returns us to our proper place in creation. God is God, and we are not. He can change people. We can't. He is the good shepherd. We are his sheep. Our job is to lean into his promise to be with us, his provision to feed us and guide us. In 10 years, you're going to look in a mirror. Someone's going to stare back at you. You're shaped by today's thoughts. The life you have is a reflection of what you think. As Solomon says so deftly in Proverbs 23, as a person thinks, so he is. So here are the 3 R's. Remove the lies, replace them with the truth, renew your mind. Instead of becoming fixated on what you see, fix your thoughts on Jesus. Take captive every lie that your enemy whispers in your ear. You are not controlled by fear. You are not stuck. You're not a slave to your habits. You're not a prisoner to your addictions. You are not a victim. You are not your past. You are not what you did. You are not what someone else did to you. You're not who others say you are. You are not who your unhealthy thoughts say you are. You are who God says you are. You are loved. You are forgiven. You are healed. You are new. You are chosen. But for this to be true, you have to make up your mind. I saw the power and the peace that comes from making up your mind 7 years ago, February 6th, 2015. That was the day I rolled to New Hanover Hospital in Wilmington to spend some time with one of my favorite people in the whole world, 50-year-old Tracy Brown. Diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer 5 years prior, she beat back the metaphorical wolf at the door more often than not. For 5 hard-fought years, her life was undergirded by one simple entry in her favorite devotional book entitled Jesus Calling. On the very date of her first surgery, January 6, 2010, she read this as the entry for the day. I'm able to do far more than all you ask or even imagine, God says. So come to me with positive expectations, knowing there is no limit to what I can accomplish. Time is a trainer teaching you to wait on me. So instead of letting difficulties draw you into worry, think about them as setting the scene for my glorious intervention. Keep your mind wide open to all that I am doing in your life. Ephesians 3, verse 20. On that Friday, 7 years ago, her doctors told her that nothing else could be done. I got there about an hour after she got the news. We cried about dreams denied, about milestones missed. She said, "Will you please walk with me through this?" "Of course I will," I said. And then she poignantly asked, "How do I get through the right now?" "First we cry," I said, "and then you breathe. And thirdly, you have to fight to stay present in the moment," which is much easier said than done. If you focus on the massive mountain, you're going to curl up in fear and in despair. But if you take care of each of these moments, then the hours and the days will take care of themselves. Tracy Brown was one of my heroes. She was supposed to live for 5 months. She lived for 5 beautiful years. Between diagnosis and death, she started a new charity in Wilmington, She Rocks, ovarian cancer research. It's raised over $1 million. She wrote a collection of letters to her only child, Emma. She embraced the doubt and the darkness, all the while testifying to what she was learning about God and about herself along the way. We ended that Friday where we began our journey 5 years earlier, by my reading Psalm 46 to her, her ruminating, marinating scripture of choice for 5 years. God is our refuge and our strength, a very present help in times of trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the sea. Be still and know that I am God. Tracy Brown understood that relationships with the Almighty and with those around us are the only things we get to keep, not the house, the car, the boat, the 401k, all the toys. The way you create relationships worth keeping with the Almighty and with those around you is by continually making up your mind about what really matters. The hymn we're about to sing was played at Tracy's service. She marinated in the music and in the message because she knew the promise was true. She would invite all of you to trust in that promise today.